The old lighthouse keeper, Elias Thorne, often said the sea had 1,000 moods. That particular evening, it was a growling beast, lashing rain against the sturdy glass of his lamproom and sending waves crashing like thunder against the cliffs below. Elias, a man whose face was as weathered as the rocks he stood upon, had just finished his nightly check of the lamp when he heard it, a faint, desperate cry carried on the wind. It was barely audible above the storm, a sound that pricked at something long dormant within him. He peered out, his old eyes squinting against the deluge, but saw nothing but the churning darkness. Then, a second cry, closer this time, and unmistakably human. Elias, a man of routine and solitude since his wife Eleanor had passed 5 years ago, felt a jolt of alarm. His lighthouse, perched on the most remote point of the coast, rarely saw visitors, especially not in such a tempest. He descended the winding stairs cautiously, his hand on the cold iron railing, his heart thrumming with an unfamiliar anxiety. As he reached the base, another cry, weaker now, echoed from the small cove below. He grabbed his thickest oilskin coat and a powerful lantern, the beam cutting a shaky path through the wind and rain. The climb down to the cove was treacherous, each step on the slippery rocks a risk. Finally, his light caught something. A small, overturned fishing skiff tossed against the jagged rocks, and huddled beside it, a young woman. She was soaked, shivering violently, and clutching a small bundle to her chest. Beside her, a little boy, no older than 5, whimpered, his face streaked with mud and tears. Elias didn't ask questions. He didn't think about the strangeness of it, or the fact that he hadn't had guests in years. The sight of their raw vulnerability, so stark against the unforgiving sea, stirred a profound memory. It was the same look he'd seen in his own eyes after Eleanor's small boat was lost to a sudden squall, leaving him alone with only the lighthouse and the endless horizon. He simply extended a hand. The woman, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief, slowly reached for it. Her grip was weak, but desperate. Elias helped her up, his strong old arm supporting her as she swayed. He led them back up the treacherous path to the lighthouse, the little boy clinging to his mother's leg, stumbling but resilient. Inside, the warm, dry air of the lighthouse hit them like a comforting embrace. Elias, with practiced efficiency, found thick blankets, brewed strong tea, and heated a pot of the hearty stew he usually saved for his own solitary dinners. The woman, whose name he soon learned was Sarah, barely spoke, her voice hoarse from the cold and fear. Her son, Finn, snuggled into a blanket by the crackling fire, his small body still trembling. Sarah's story unfolded slowly, hesitantly, over the next few hours. She had been on a small fishing trip with her husband, a quiet man named Thomas, and their son. A sudden, violent storm had capsized their boat. Thomas, a skilled fisherman, had managed to secure Finn in a life jacket and pushed Sarah towards a floating piece of debris, his last words an urgent plea for her to save their son. He had vanished beneath the waves before her eyes. Sarah, battered and bruised, had drifted for what felt like an eternity. Finn held tightly in her arms, until the currents had somehow, miraculously, washed them into Elias's secluded cove. Elias listened, his own grief echoing the raw pain in Sarah's voice. He knew the sea gave, and the sea took. He knew the hollow ache of loss. He knew the terrifying responsibility of being the sole protector of a child. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply offered a safe harbor. The next morning, the storm had broken, leaving behind a sky of bruised purples and grays. Finn, though subdued, was playing with a wooden sailboat Elias had carved years ago for his own son, who had tragically died in infancy. Sarah, her face still pale, looked out at the churning sea, her eyes distant. She spoke of needing to get to the nearest town, to contact family, to try and piece together a shattered life. But her small boat was gone, and the road to town was long and difficult, especially with a child. Elias, seeing the fear and exhaustion still etched into her features, made an offer. "You can stay here," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "Until you're ready, until you find your footing." Sarah stared at him, disbelief warring with a flicker of hope in her weary eyes. She had expected kindness, perhaps a meal and directions, but not an invitation into a stranger's solitary world. Days turned into a week. Sarah, though still grieving, slowly began to find a rhythm within the lighthouse. She helped Elias with small tasks, her movements quiet and respectful. Finn, initially shy, soon found a bond with the old keeper, listening wide-eyed to Elias's stories of the sea, his small hand often clutching Elias's calloused finger. The lighthouse, once a silent sentinel, now held the soft sounds of Finn's laughter and Sarah's quiet humming as she worked. Elias, in turn, found himself sharing stories of Eleanor, tales he hadn't spoken aloud in years. He spoke of her gentle nature, her love for the sea, and the way her laughter used to fill the very rooms they now occupied. Sarah listened, her empathy a silent balm to his long-held sorrow. He realized, with a surprising clarity, how much he had missed the simple presence of another soul in his home, the quiet comfort of shared humanity. Then came the day Sarah's brother, a stern-faced man named David, arrived. He had been searching for her, frantic with worry, and had finally tracked her to Elias's remote lighthouse after finding the wreckage of the boat. David was grateful, but also wary of Elias, a stranger who had taken in his sister and nephew. He spoke of taking Sarah and Finn back to their family home to help them start anew. Sarah looked at Elias, then at Finn, who was holding Elias's hand. A conflict played out on her face. She knew she had to leave, to face the future, but a part of her dreaded leaving the unexpected sanctuary she had found. Elias, seeing her struggle, simply nodded. "Family is important," he said, his voice steady. "But so is finding your strength." He didn't try to stop her, but he didn't let her leave alone either. He packed a small satchel of provisions, gave Finn a freshly carved wooden whale, and walked with them down the winding path to David's waiting vehicle. As they prepared to leave, Sarah turned to Elias, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything. You saved us." Elias merely smiled, a rare, gentle smile that softened the rugged lines of his face. "The sea always finds a way to bring people where they need to be," he said, his gaze sweeping across the vast blue expanse. "Sometimes it brings them to a lighthouse." As David drove away, Elias stood watching until their car was just a speck on the distant road. He walked back to the lighthouse, the silence a little deeper than before. But it wasn't the same empty silence he had lived with for years. It was a silence now imbued with the echo of laughter, the memory of shared stories, and the quiet understanding that, even in loss, life found a way to weave new threads of connection. The old lighthouse keeper, who had believed his story was written and sealed, found himself looking at the horizon, wondering what new tales the sea would bring to his doorstep next. He felt a quiet sense of hope, a warmth that settled deep in his bones, reminding him that even the most solitary lighthouses could become beacons of unexpected beginnings.